This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
We made this.
Welcome back to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host this week, Zach Moore, and I'm joined by Miss Michelle Milbauer. How's it going, Michelle?
I am doing well. Looking forward to talking to you today.
We are going to do the 5 questions of X with you, so just, buckle down, guys. We're going to get some in-depth X-Files fandom knowledge from Michelle here.
No pressure or anything. Oh, my goodness.
The expectations are high, so I hope you brought your A-game. We are talking about the 4th episode of Season 4, Teliko. So that's going to be our main topic of discussion. But as I said, this is Michelle's first time on the show, so we like to delve into all of your fandoms based off these 5 questions, which you did have in advance. So these you're not being blindsided. So are you ready to answer the 5 questions of X?
I am ready, though I must say that I reserve the right to change the answers to these at any time going forward.
Absolutely. That's why I say, when I answer them, it's like, today, right? Today, this is my favorite. But you never know, right? That's the deal with fandom. And with what they show, like the X-Files, which is 11 seasons now, right? There's so much to choose from. It's hard to, nail down, carved in stone, this will always and ever shall be my answer of my favorite fill in the blank. So, let's start with the first question of X. When did you first discover the X-Files?
Well, I'm going to reveal my age, I suppose. It was pretty close to the beginning. I didn't get in at the pilot. I think I saw it in reruns at first, but the very first episode I discovered was Ice. And that was one that was both horrifying and fascinating at the same time, if that makes sense. I didn't really want to watch this. This is gross and intense and awful and fascinating, and I can't look away. And I haven't in 25 years. So, Ice was my first episode.
That's a great one to start with, because even the show decided to copy it, time again.
They did. Well, we had success with Ice. Let's try Fire this time.
Nice. Ice in the forest. With
right.
Darkness Falls, ice in a volcano. But hey, and Ice itself was, kind of an interpretation of the thing. But that's a great episode. Season 1, I enjoy Season 1 quite a bit. I know a lot of people rank it a little lower, but I think everyone across the board ranks Ice as one of the best episodes regardless of the season. So that's a great one to start you off with to pull you in. Absolutely. So, question number 2. What is your favorite episode of The X-Files?
This question is just cruel. How do you pick? So, my favorite for now, I'll say is Memento Mori. And I think I choose Memento Mori, and I go back to it and watch relatively frequently, because it sort of shows the makeup of the partnership. He's off doing her thing. She's off doing her thing, handling stuff from her side. He's off. He's trying to find his truth, his answers. But ultimately, at the end, they come back together and they resolve to go at whatever the problem is together. And that seems to be a through line throughout the series to me. That they're separate parts of the whole, I guess. And I will admit here, I'm a shipper, so there's that last scene. That doesn't hurt. But so for now, I'll say Memento Mori, but there are so many to choose from.
So a shipper. So you're very satisfied with how things ended with Mulder and Scully being one big happy family at the end, huh?
What really? We want to get into My Struggle 4. That's That whole phrase, my struggle for, that's a trigger object for me, and anybody that's listened to some of the roundtables we've done probably knows that. No, I'm a shipper, but I think my struggle for and the ending of my struggle for was terrible. I'm a shipper, but I don't know that I need happily ever after, as we got our 2.5 kids and a dog and a picket fence. That's not the X-Files, so
gotcha.
No, that's not my jam.
No, that's a great choice for a great episode, because I'm not necessarily a romantic Mulder and Scully shipper. I'm more like a platonic Mulder and Scully shipper, if there is such a thing. So
Sure,
but
why
that
not?
episode it's a perfect example of that. They have this strong bond. They don't necessarily have to be in a relationship for that to exist, And in these earlier seasons, that's what's going on. And that's a great episode with all the other things going on leading up to that, and so that's an excellent pick. Excellent. So the third question of X: what is your favorite season of the X-Files?
This one's also really tough. For me, it's a toss-up, 3, 4, and 5. So for now, I'll split the difference and go with 4. We got some great episodes. Memento Mori is season 4, but we get home in season 4, which is another one that's just creepy and terrifying and intense and awful and amazing and awesome all at the same time. Paper Hearts is in season 4. Great episode. Then there's the mythology episodes, Tunguska and Terma, Tempus Fugit and Max. There's just a lot of really great episodes in there. So for now, I'll go with season 4, but anywhere in there, 3, 4, 5, I think are really strong, great seasons.
Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man as well, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Although Paper Hearts, I swear that is probably a top 10 episode for me. Talk about, if that was really the resolution to Samantha, I would have been 100% fine with that. I feel like it got more and more convoluted as time went on. So I really did enjoy that episode, stand on. And hey, don't forget, you have Teliko in season 4.
Oh, of course. How could I forget?
Automatically makes it a favorite season. So no, and yeah, I'm right there with you. I think when I was answering these questions, I picked season 3. But 4 would have been right there with it. This is like the 3, 4, and 5, just as you said. That's like the prime time of the X-Files. Definitely, I think so. Before they moved to California, back had that Vancouver flavor from the early season. So
Vancouver was very much a character in the show.
Absolutely.
In those early days, definitely.
So, our fourth question of X: who is your favorite character? And it doesn't have to be Mulder or Scully; it can be a supporting character. Who's your favorite?
This isn't a new answer. I think most people say this, but this was by far the easiest question for me, and it's Scully. And most of that was, once again, here we go, I'm revealing my age. I'll just say it. I was 15 when the X-Files started, or almost 15. And there's this strong, intelligent, independent woman being portrayed on television, not as a sidekick, not as the secretary, not as, just a background character. It was just amazing. And the Scully effect in full effect. I wanted to pursue a career in law enforcement in forensic science. Ultimately, real life interfered. That didn't happen, but it started with the X-Files and with the character of Scully. The fascination with forensic science, with law enforcement started there. And prior to that, what did we have? Reruns of Cagney and Lacey. No, that's old people show. I don't know. This was somebody that, for me, and I'm sure a lot of teenagers, girls at the time, thought, that could be me, and this is awesome. So it's most definitely, without a doubt, Scully for me.
Yeah, I don't know what the tally is on the favorite characters. I'm sure, when the podcast wraps up, there'll be a tally board. Tony, listen. Make it happen. But I would say probably Scully is definitely, at least right now, in the lead, and I could see that being the final say for all the reasons you said. So absolutely.
And I think also, really, she's sort of the window into the series. She's especially at the beginning when she's called in, by Blevins, and she's given the assignment to join the X-Files and head on down to the basement. She's our view into that world. And And that's seen in the voiceovers in the first season. She's sort of narrating everything. She is our point of view at first, I think, or that was my kind of observation of her then. So I think that could possibly be why a lot of people cite her as their favorite character, but for me, it's all about the girl power.
So our fifth and final question, Max. You're doing great so far. All right, so this is your last one here. You're going to stick the landing.
Oh, no.
What is your favorite moment from the entire series?
This one's also really hard. I narrowed it down to 2. And my runner-up was the very end of Fight the Future. Now, I don't know if that counts because it's the movie, whatever. But when they're at, I guess it's supposed to be the Washington Monument at the reflecting pole. Somewhere in D.C., anyway. Mm-hmm. And Scully takes his hand and says, if I quit now, they win. And I've already admitted to being a shipper, but it's not because of the hand-holding thing and, schmoopy, anything like that, but because that is another example of how, no matter what crap they throw at us, we're in this together. So we'll just walk away from here and continue the fight. So that one sticks out in my mind for sure. But I think what I'll cite as my favorite moment, and it's kind of 2 moments, so I'm cheating. Sorry. It's way back in EBE, which is a great episode. Deep Throat says to Mulder, a lie, Mr. Mulder, is most convincingly hidden between 2 truths. And that also kind of sums up the entire series. Like, you're watching this and all the evidence that they see, everything that they find, everything they experience, you're always left wondering, well, is this the lie? Or is this the truth that's sandwiched in between the lies? And it's something that it's another thread that runs through the whole thing, in my opinion. And then, of course, there's Mulder's response at the close of the episode where he says, I'm wondering which lie to believe. So that once again, 2 moments, I cheated, but those really stick out in my mind.
No, IBE, I always say, like, if there's one episode that, like, is a distillation of the entire series in one episode, I would pick EBE. Because it has everything, as you said. I mean, like, that spells out what their entire journey is just in one episode. And, gotta love Deep Throat. Like, lie, Mr. Mulder, is best hidden between 2 truths. Had to get my Jerry Harden impression in there. I know people love it. At least I love it. So.
Yes.
And then,
I won't be doing any impressions. Sorry.
It's not a requirement.
Okay,
an impression is not one of the 5 questions of X, so don't worry.
Awesome.
But no, I love that the end, as you said, where he just kind of like Deep Throat's like, and he walks off. Doesn't even answer, just shrugs off and walks into the mist. But those are some great picks. So you did it. You answered the 5 questions of X. You are an official X-Cast co-host now. Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
All right, so as I said, we're talking about Season 4, Episode 4, Teliko, this week. Now, this episode, here's what I stand on these kind of episodes. It's always very finicky when the X-Files tries to tackle some of these subjects, like The Other. You had Hell Money. You have the one with the Chupacabra. It's like they mean well.
Even a lot of the Native American ones, they're trying, but it just feels cringeworthy, awkward, in some cases inappropriate.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think that was ever their intent. I don't think there was any maliciousness, but sometimes it's like, wow, you thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, it's they mean well.
Yeah,
but it's just they always seem to make it odd and uncomfortable in some way, and like I think. And I applaud them for trying to tackle some social issues, right?
Right.
But
especially
it's like,
in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Because they were, that's what sci-fi is for. That's what this genre is for, to kind of reframe something you might not accept through, like, watching it on the news or through something like, Law and Order, right? You put it in a new lens, you're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. But they seem to consistently just make it kind of weird, And not in, like, the weird X-Files way that we're like, oh, we're talking about immigration now. Yeah, not the good weird that we want from the show. So, this one has a lot of, race issues and whatnot, and we'll get into it. So that's hanging over this episode, especially the music.
I made a note of the music.
I love Mark Snow. I love his work. He does great stuff. But sometimes he just turns it up to 11. And he really does that. And it's like we go to full tribal African music many times.
Might have gone to 14 in here. I noted on the right at the beginning of my notes, terrible quote-unquote African music. Mm-hmm. Then a little bit later, what's with the bongos and insane xylophone? Mm-hmm. And then a little bit later on, I'm reluctant to try and pass judgment on, racial issues or, it's not my place to be offended by this because I'm neon white. But I was like, this tribal chanting that seemed to keep getting louder and louder and louder and louder. Even I was becoming offended by it, and it's not my place to be offended. It's like, okay, turn it down a bit, guys.
And I've said it before, like sometimes the Native American music, they go, oh, there's that kind of like, oh, we're part of the earth now, music, and this one is just the African equivalent of that, like literally like bongo drums and all that. And had they kind of turned that down some, yes. I feel like it wouldn't have been so. That's why I'm bringing it up now off the top, because this is something that kind of like it looms large of the episode, and it casts a shadow over it, and it kind of makes you feel like, what's going on here? So anyway, I had to get that out. But speaking of Teliko, or Teliko, depending on your pronunciation, it does mean spirit of the air in African mythology, which is sometimes thought to be an albino. So this is actually based in reality. They didn't just invent. This isn't like a squeeze situation with tombs, which.
There's some parallels to be drawn there.
Exactly. So they took this Teliko from African mythology. Thumbs up there for I like it when they take something that is existing in the real world and they kind of tweak it, like lake monsters or something like that. Like
right.
Quagmire,
cryptozoology, right.
Exactly. I love that stuff. So I'm like, oh, cool, let's put a twist on it. Even as I was talking about the Chupacabra, it's like, well, at least that's something that existed. You didn't just make it up. There is a mythology that exists in the real world, so that's cool. But then they kind of borrow from their own mythology and rip off Squeeze, 3 seasons previous.
Squeeze, and I got some hints of Too Shy in there as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, when we dive into it, we'll talk about it. But there is like this character needs to do this to stay alive, and he's going to keep anyway. It's a pattern, so that's another mark against this episode. So all that to say, out of 10, what would you give Teliko?
I seem to end up on the X-Cast so far discussing episodes that I don't like. I'm beginning to think that people are going to think that I don't really like this show, and I really, really do. But this is not good. I mean, it's not the most offensive episode that has aired, but it doesn't stand out in any way other than its cringeworthiness. So I'm not going to give it a 1 or anything that low. I'm going to say 4.5, 5. Maybe I'm being too generous with it. But, I mean, it's not the worst episode that's been produced and aired and I've sat through, but it's not one that I go back to. I hadn't watched it in years. So, I mean, it's straight up, I don't know if I can even say it's middle of the road. So I'm going to stop hedging. I'm going to say 4.
4. Okay. That's fair. I think that's fair. I mean, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I think there are some great elements to this episode, but again, a lot of the creative decisions and some story beats really knock it in the offensive category. And again, it's not my place to be offended either, but I'm getting secondhand offendedness by just the extreme in-your-face nature of some of the things they choose to do here. So,
yes. Okay,
so 4 for you, 5 for me. IMDb
9.
IMDb ranked it a 6.9.
Oh, wow, that's low 10, for IMDb.
Which is low because, we were talking before off microphone that IMDb, it's not out of 10. It's like 6 to 9. So if you're in the 6s, you're in the lower spectrum of episodes. And I think that's a fair rating for this one as well. So, and one final bit of trivia about this episode, which with going line with our opinions, kind of shows you what they might have been thinking themselves at the time. This was the last episode of the X-Files to air on a Friday. It was a Friday night. It was the last episode to air, and then it switched to Sunday nights with the next episode on Ruhi. and they actually held back on Ruhi because they wanted that to be their big Sunday night premiere. They didn't want Teliko to be the big Sunday night premiere because I thought it was better representative of the show.
Choice.
And that shows you that they're thinking the same things we are, even back then in the 90s. So, but let's get into it. Teliko. Teliko is the third episode of the X-Files fourth season. It aired on October 18th, 1996. It was written by Howard Gordon and directed by James Charleston. So the episode starts out on an airplane, and if you're in a sci-fi genre show and on an airplane, bad things are going to happen, right? Like Twilight Zone, Fringe, X-Files, it doesn't matter. Someone is going to die, basically.
Nothing good happens on an airplane in the X-Files.
So I will say, I distinctly remember this teaser from when I was a kid watching the show, because you see a man, he's obviously, and we're on an international flight, because based off the dress of some of the people, as they're talking about, we're already into the cultural getting finicky stuff, I think. So we see a man, he's reading something, takes his glasses off, goes to the restroom, but we get this point of view shot of him walking from the restroom. We see this close-up of this albino face and this pink eye watching him through the door, which I thought was very creepy and effective. And then he goes in there, and airplanes, they're claustrophobic anyway, and then you get in the bathroom, like the most claustrophobic thing in the world is an airplane bathroom, right? So this guy gets in there, washes his face, and then he looks up and he screams, and then we get this almost, I don't know if it was intentional comedy or not, but it felt that way. You get the little occupied sign switches. It made me laugh, honestly.
Just now it's occupied?
Yeah.
My first thought on seeing this teaser, I don't remember my first thought upon watching it originally. I was young enough that I was probably oblivious to the fact that it was offensive the whole way through. But
oh yeah.
That becomes very evident with later watch throughs. But during the rewatch, my first thought was, the very first thing I wrote down is, this has to be the world's largest airplane bathroom. Now, I've not taken any long international flights, so I know those planes are a lot bigger, but that bathroom was palatial. That's a huge bathroom. So that was the very first thing that stuck out to me on the rewatch.
Well, yeah, that bothered me, but then when you find out that this guy's basically African tombs,
right,
I'm like, oh, he's squeezed into the ceiling somehow. But I will say, this scared me.
He's also part spider, because he can stick to the wall?
Yes. Very undefined powers, which we'll discuss as we go on here. But, it did scare me. Like, as I was an impressionable young man, I was like, I don't want to go to the airline bathroom. There might be an albino in there. He's going to suck my pigmentation. I mean, look, if you're going to suck my pigmentation, it's not going to last. It'll last you like an hour. I got nothing, all right? You're going to get some freckles, and that's it. So, anyway, but unfounded fears. But I think, the absurdity aside, I think it was effectively done, at least shot that way, because then we cut to what we fade to, like, the next morning, the airplane's about to land, they go up to the bathroom, knock on it, and I wasn't sure, I guess this is kind of a bait and switch, right, because both these guys were supposed to be on the flight, I guess, because we think that they're gonna, the flight attendant sees an empty seat, goes up to the doors, like, is anybody in there? And it's the albino guy, but now he has pigmentation. And he goes back to his seat, and like, oh, that's weird. And then we open another bathroom door, and it's the gentleman we saw earlier, and he is dead, and his entire pigmentation has been sucked out of him, and he basically looks like an albino. And then we cut to the X-Files. So, an effective teaser, I think. But we do need to mention that the truth is out there is not the tag on these opening credits. It's deceive, inveigle, and obfuscate, which is a term they used several times in this episode. I guess that was an earworm in their brain or something, right, because they mentioned that about 3 or 4 times specifically. And I thought this was odd that they changed the truth is out there for this episode, because usually they reserve that for big mythology episodes or big, with the revival did it. I think almost season 11 especially did it almost every episode. Yes, but that's a special case. But for have some random Monster of the Week episode in season 4 change, and I thought was a little like, oh, okay. It kind of takes away how important it is when it is changed, I think.
Exactly. You and I are on the same wavelength, because I looked up some episodes that they changed it for, and it's stuff, Erlenmeyer Flask, they changed it to Trust No One. Ascension was Deny Everything. Anasazi. I am not even going to try and step on how to pronounce that, but it was the Navajo version of The Truth Is Out There. They changed it for Herrenvolk, for Terma, for Gethsemane, Redux, The Red and the Black, The End, The Unnatural, which was great pun, The Big Inning, or In the Big Inning, Triangle, The Sixth Extinction 2, and Closure. So, yeah, it did stand out as really strange to me that they changed it for this, especially the meaning of those words. It could have been used, I think, more effectively in a mythology episode. This one, it just sort of like, I didn't quite understand why it fit in here. That stood out to me as strange.
Maybe trying to make it seem more important than it really was.
Possibly.
Perhaps compensating, I'm not sure. But we come back, and Scully has been called into Skinner's office like at 5 in the morning or some super early hour. And they're there with another doctor and Dr. Bruin, and there's a case that they're looking at that there have been a string of murders and disappearances of African-American men. And they finally find the body of one Owen Sanders. And they explain to Scully that, it's African-American men and this and that. And they hand her a picture, and she's like, I'm confused. I thought you said this man was black. It's like, Scully, you're a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, looking at that picture, maybe it's just me being a jerk. And, they had better makeup effects then. I know it. They did better makeup in the X-Files previous to this. I made note of her making that statement, and my note says, that's clearly an African-American man spray painted white. Mm-hmm. They had better makeup for the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz in 1939.
Well, you don't know what the process is when someone gets his pigmentation sucked out of him in this fashion, do you?
I suppose not, and I hope I don't find out what that looks like, but I'm hoping it's not white Krylon, because, right. Wow.
Yeah, I just... Well, Scully says that. He's like, I thought he was black, and they're like, he was. I'm not sure I follow. And it's like, all right. So anyway, but yeah, I'm right there with you though.
Ridiculous.
It is
Ridiculous.
Yeah. But then I love what Bruin says here. He's like, in my opinion, this investigation should begin and end under a microscope. I thought that was just a funny line that stuck out to me. But anyway, Scully goes down to the basement to do an autopsy on Owen Sanders here, and Mulder comes down, and he is in full, like, callous as ever comedy hour from Mulder. He comes down, he's like, hey, who's the stiff? And he's just eating his sunflower seeds,
That was another thing I noted. Who eats in the morgue during an autopsy? Mm-hmm. I mean, she's collecting evidence, and you're chomping on sunflower seeds. I don't think that's allowed. Nor is it a good idea. Like, who wants to eat in the morgue?
I like the continuity. I mean, with Mulder,
true,
obviously...
Well, yeah. They got something right.
The sunflower seed guy, right? I do wonder sometimes if this stuff is in the script or if, like, Duchovny's just adding something to do, because, Duchovny's famous for just, ad-libbing or adding something to do. He's like, look, this scene's boring. Give me a little something here, Yeah. Also, the Michael Jackson joke, kind of tasteless.
Yeah, kind of?
Extremely tasteless. Because she explains to Mulder that this was an African American male, and now he's an albino. Now he's like, Mulder's like, well, there's a Michael Jackson joke in here somewhere. It's just not coming to me. Like, come on, man, this is '98, and Michael Jackson was already. I don't know what phase of his career was at that point, but even so, like, don't go there.
Yeah.
But that's the mantra of this episode. Don't go there, but they go there.
Yeah.
So anyway, but he's munching away on his sunflower seeds, and he seems to think it's a PR exercise. He questions why Scully's working on this. And this is the episode, again, starting to have a sense of self-importance, right? I think it's not called for. They're like, oh, well, black men are getting murdered and no one cares, and this is just an attempt to show that we do. And I don't know. This is a weird angle to get Mulder on the case, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I suppose it was an attempt to be groundbreaking, an attempt to be like, look at us, we care about social issues. It was just so clumsily handled. Mm-hmm. And I mean, once again, this coming after a terrible Michael Jackson joke.
Yes, you cannot pick a lane.
Right.
Pick a lane. But again, Scully is just oddly obtuse. She's like, perhaps there was a problem with the identification because of the pigmentation. Because Mulder points out if this is a disease, right? Because Scully and this other doctor are thinking it's a disease and these guys are dying. Mulder's like, well, why are they just disappearing? Why are there like 4 of them all at once and all this? And Scully thinks they couldn't be identified because of the pigmentation. Like, I mean, there's like 1,000 ways to identify, but it's fingerprints, dental. I mean, that's a little Scully being obtuse for the sake of like the conflict between her and Mulder and what they're believing here. But anyway, then we meet Marcus Duff. He's the immigration officer. Now he's played by Carl Lumbly, and I love Carl Lumbly. He is the voice of the Martian Manhunter in the DC animated universe, Justice League and whatnot. He's also famous for being on Mantis back in the day, and then probably most well known to audiences for being on Alias. So love this guy. But he's knocking on the door of Samuel Aboa, who is our albino suspect, monster of the week, as we discover, and he's in there to kind of fill out some paperwork with him, and again, I think it was this episode is almost self-aware, but it's not quite, because they building up the music where Marcus goes in there, he's like, hey, can we turn some light on in here? It's kind of dark when you fill out this paperwork, and the music's like building and building and building, like, whoa, is a boa gonna kill this guy right now? And he just turns on the light and the music stops. I thought that was a nice misdirect there. But we find out that he's helping him with his transition to America. He's like, oh, it starts today. You can live the American dream, and your family can come over here. And again, I think this is them trying to say something, but they obviously weren't sure how to say it.
Yes, I agree. This is also the point where I got the first Tombs vibe from the episode. I guess other than the red eyeball mirroring Tombs.
Oh yeah, because
Tombs
have the yellow eyeball. Exactly. Good call.
But I noted that it's trying to be Tombs level creepy, but it's just not quite getting there.
That's and that was a common criticism even at the time. People were like, "Hey, haven't we seen this before?" in the X-Files. And Tombs is one of the most famous monsters of the week. So people are immediately going to think that, especially as they go further in front of the episode. It's more and more pronounced. But anyway, that's setting up this little subplot that ultimately goes nowhere. Like I really like Carl Lumbly. I thought they could have done places with this character here, but and we'll get to it. But his character resolution is a complete anticlimax with this immigration officer. So then we get to Pendrell. I love Pendrell. We have Pendrell down the lab there. I think everybody wants to be Mulder, but let's face it, we really are. If we were in the X-Files, we would be Pendrell. That's for me.
Being all nerdy and lovesick over Scully.
Exactly. Well, he's like, hey, is Scully coming? I just don't want to repeat myself. I was like, sure, you're just looking for Scully.
Sure.
I don't blame you. Mulder, again, he's in a mood today. He's just screwing with Pendrell.
He's like, being a dick.
It's like she's on a date. He's like, corpse, get over it. She's doing an autopsy, get over it. So that was a funny little character moment between them. And Pendrell really was a great recurring character, and I'm glad he was around as long as he was, and I wish he was around for longer, but that's the discussion for another time. Doing his doing the science here, investigation. He discovers a couple things that do come into play later. There's asbestos, the toxic mold on the body, and then also they discover this like thorn kind of seed, which is indigenous only to West Africa. Which is an interesting plot development. They don't know how it would have gotten here, and this doesn't help Scully at all. But Mulder calls her from a payphone for some reason, which I thought was that stuck out to me because payphones always stick out to me these days when you see them on TV shows.
Endangered species when you see one.
Yeah, that's more rare than this West African
seed
exactly. is the payphone, right? But this doesn't help Scully really because but she does say that she's discovered the pituitary gland was drained, and that's what caused the death, and also it controls the melanonin. I always say that wrong. Is that correct?
Melanonin?
Yeah, okay, there we go. I got it right, I guess. But that controls that, and that explains the pigmentation change in these people. And then I guess Mulder, again, it's the 90s. They weren't really sure how to use cell phones or not, but it's like a reveal because when Mulder hangs up, he like walks over to board an airplane after this conversation. It's like, oh, he was in the airport, right? So,
but back to Scully in the morgue. Mulder calls Scully. She apparently had just finished an autopsy. Her lab coat looks like something out of a horror film. What did you perform that autopsy with? A chainsaw? How does that happen?
It was rather Sam Raimi-esque.
Yes, somebody in costuming got way carried away because that it was a laughable moment. Like, how do you even? I mean, it was like looped up. It was very almost artistic, I guess. But wow.
Yeah, that was. I'm just trying to imagine how she got so much a very careless autopsy, sloppy autopsy from Agent Scully this week.
Very.
Oh man,
I'm glad we didn't see that one.
Yes, thank you for cutting away to something else. So Mulder, as we said, he got on an airplane and he's gone to Washington D.C. and I'm glad I have a chance to talk about this because in my 5 questions of X. Michelle, my favorite character was Mr. X. I loved Mr. X. I thought he was a great successor to Deep Throat. Very intense character. Came to an untimely end, but again, he didn't overstay his welcome like some characters do on the X-Files, so I appreciate that. But here, we have met this character previously, Marita Covarrubias. And
great name.
Hard to pronounce. Talk about hard to pronounce words. I'm going to be straight. I'm not the biggest fan of this character. I think that although, Deep Throat was Deep Throat, and then Mr. X was kind of a logical transition because he was his successor, she just kind of comes out of nowhere, and I feel like it just feels really forced. Her and Mulder's like, you're going to help me. You left an opening, and I'm here to walk through the opening and get help from you and stuff. What are your thoughts on this character? I just thought the setup was nowhere near as good as the last 2 quote-unquote informant characters.
Yeah, not at all. I just think that they didn't really know how to use her. I don't want to say she was underused, but she never really seemed to be of much help. Whereas I said before, Deep Throat would help, and I mean, he provided the words, I suppose, for the through line, of lies most convincingly hidden between 2 truths. And Mr. X had a chip on his shoulder the whole time. Like, I'm helping you, but I'm doing it on my terms, and I'm kind of doing it begrudgingly. Marita was just kind of there. I'm not sure that she ever really helped, I guess. I mean, her character was somewhat forgettable. Other than, ultimately, she ended up being not much more than a consortium bargaining chip. She ended up being their guinea pig. Oh, we'll try the black oil on her. Let's see what happens. I did note in this episode, Marita looks bored. Like, after Mulder scares her on the stairs of the Washington Monument, I suppose that was supposed to be. I'm not sure where she was. She was just kind of rolled her eyes like, oh God, this guy again. What do you want? I can't help you. And she just seemed bored. Like, why are you asking me this?
Yeah, Mulder has a line here. He literally says, quote, I'm not sure why, but I thought you'd be in a position to help me.
We're not sure why either.
They're literally writing into the episode. They're like, we need a kind of informant character. Now, they had tried, before Mr. X, there was going to be Miss X, and she was going to be a woman, and a woman Deep Throat, if you will, right? But
which would have been interesting to see.
But here we see it.
Well, but do we? It's like, well, we'll just, it's not the same character except female. Now, I mean, granted, had they, we just killed off Mr. X, we're going to bring in Miss Y? I don't know. It would have felt shoehorned in at that point. So they had to make her different enough from X for it to be a contrast, because X was an informant, but X was not the next Deep Throat.
Yeah, ultimately, for me, I just loved Mr. X. So I think that in addition to all the things we're saying here about Marita, I think just loving him so much and having his successor be a disappointment was like a 1-2 punch for me, and I just never liked the character after this.
He was so intense in everything that he did, and Marita is sort of the opposite of that to me. She's just sort of a reluctant informant as well, but she almost seems bored with the endeavor, I guess. Yeah,
low energy. I don't know if it's Laurie Holden's performance or what. She's like, oh, sure, I'll help you out. It's like, can we have some life here?
Or I can't help you. Like, have you been drugged by the West African seed as well? Like,
Very good. Very good. But yeah, and this is her one scene in the episode, and then as Mulder continues his investigation, she helps him behind the scenes, opens some doors at an embassy and gives him a file, this kind of thing. But we never really see her actively help him or get any kind of follow with her in this episode, and that does seem to be a trend with her, just being even more. Mr. X didn't like it, but he got in there and got his hands dirty and got the job done. She's just a very passive informant, low energy passive informant. She is. So anyway, enough about her. I'm glad I got to mention that because I had mentioned in my 5-question X that she was my least favorite character. so now I can kind of explain myself in more detail in an appropriate episode about it. So anyway, moving on. We're back in Philadelphia now, because that's where these crimes are taking place. By the way, I don't know if we mentioned that yet, but got a man at a bus stop, and
that is a really, really crappy bus stop.
You didn't like the set decoration for this?
Wow. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, the other side. Okay. I'm a Pittsburgher, so Pittsburgher, Philly, we could get into some rivalry there. I won't do that, but I mean, because there's crappy bus stops in Pittsburgh, believe me. But that was just like, wow. I mean, that was such a crappy rundown area. I was questioning whether or not there would be a bus line go through there anyway. I mean, where were you? Supposedly, I guess there was his job was at a fast food restaurant down the street, but it looked like a very industrial area. So it did a bus stop there didn't seem to fit, but it was just really busted up and run down, and it was a creepy bus stop.
Yeah, even if there aren't pancreas sucking vampires hanging out, like I still wouldn't want to be at that bus stop for sure. So he gets a toxic dart in the neck, and I always think of, whenever I say toxic dart, I have to think of episode 2 Star Wars. So Obi-Wan pulls out a dart, he's like, toxic dart. So anyway, had to get that in there. But so we're starting to see, okay, this is how these guys get attacked. We're starting to get some context now. It really puts him in it paralyzes him, and it makes him disoriented because he falls back onto the bus stop, and he's sitting there. And then the bus pulls up, and I love this bus driver who just has no patience for this guy, huh?
That bus driver's a jerk. Nothing like being a concerned, helpful citizen. I mean, call it in. Yeah, maybe you don't want this weirdo on your bus if he's just a weirdo, but I don't know. He seemed to be in some sort of distress. Wouldn't you use your radio and call for some assistance for this poor guy?
Well, he did have a schedule to keep, Michelle.
Oh, that's right. That excuses everything. Make sure you note that, Scully. I had to be on schedule.
Yeah, and then I love how he covers his ass later. He's like, oh, well, I asked if he needed help, but he didn't say anything. He's like, that's not exactly what you said. He was like, hey, you getting on or not? You stupid or something? Anyway, so his one escape, unfortunately, the bus driver's a jerk, so he leaves. And then, this is the guy that got shot by the dart. And then when the bus drives off, we have the African tribal music, as you said, Michelle, it gets turned up to 14.
Yes.
As we see a boa again, So we know what's happening next to poor fast food worker guy. But then we cut to commercial. We come back. The Scully is interviewing this guy as we were joking about. The Mulder shows up, and her and Scully have a back and forth about the disease and this and that. Mulder pulls out the file, which assumably he got via the channels of Marita, and the file from the case at the very beginning, because this is actually kind of out of format for the show, because we saw this case at the very beginning, the cold open or the teaser, and that's not what spurred everything else. This was covered up, the incident on the airplane. They're just following these murders in Philadelphia, so we're finally circling back around for the first time this episode, about halfway through, to the initial murder we saw at the beginning. So but I did like this line here. Mulder and Scully are going back and forth about it, and Mulder, of course, has his theories, and Scully has hers. And she's mentioning this file. She says, "I thought you said the cause of death was undetermined," and Mulder says, "Undetermined, but not necessarily unknown." And I was like, "Man, that is like the X-Files right there, right?"
Yeah.
So always
that tracks.
Even in the most questionable episodes, there's always some great dialogue for sure.
Yes.
Kramer moments. So. But then we get the cops are searching for the young man who disappeared from the bus stop, and they're going around the neighborhood, and they go up to Aboa's door, which we saw before when Marcus, Carl Lumley's character, went up there, and one cop says to the other, "A boa? What the hell kind of name is that?" It's like, really? Like, again, the X-Files just hammering that in, right? And of course, they had 1% subtlety and had the African-American cop say it instead of, like, the white cop, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, at least they didn't that much. But, I mean, once again, this is the mid to late 90s.
96, yeah.
In Philadelphia. It's not as if they're in a secluded area where people of different cultures, different nationalities. There have been immigrants on the East Coast, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Washington, D.C., in all those areas. Some beat cop in Philly in the 90s is going to be confused because somebody has a name that's not Jones or Smith. That was one of many things that struck out as weird and not the good weird.
Not the good weird. That's the Teliko, not the good weird. Yeah, it's like they're just trying too hard to like hammer the point home. It's like, yeah, we get it, okay? The outsider, okay, we understand what you're trying to say. You're doing a horrible job of saying it, but we see your point. And then, of course, right, they're looking for the guy. They ask Dubois if he's seen him. He's like, no, I haven't seen him. And then, of course, you pan over, and the guy's sitting right there in the living room just having his pigmentation drained out of him. So it's like, well, there he was.
This is the point where I noted that Samuel is the equivalent of a pigment-sucking vampire, as Virgil in Canto back in Too Shy was a fat-sucking vampire. So that now they're borrowing from a whole other episode.
Right, it's the sci-fi vampire, right? So you have the vampire, and then you have your weird tweak on the vampire, because all these other genres, like I love Star Trek, and they have like the salt vampire on Star Trek. It's a famous monster, right? And so that kind of made me think of that as well. It's like adjective vampire, like that is what genre shows do. They find some other take on it, but yeah, absolutely. And again, Virgil in Too Shy, right? And then Tombs in Tombs and Squeeze. These are all very similar modus operandi here, because they're not. I guess the characters aren't really evil, as they talk about later. Like Mulder's just talking about, look, it's about survival, it's about self-preservation. But at some point, like, the methods you're doing to stay alive are not moral. So I don't know where you draw the line. Like, I don't know what to tell these guys. Sorry, man, just curl up in a ball and die. I don't know, but don't murder woman after woman for their fat, or man after man for their pigmentation, right?
Right.
I mean, that's just common sense. We're living in a society, people.
Is being an albino really that bad of a thing? Like, does that justify murder?
Well, that's the thing. Like, there are people who were albino, and they don't have to do this, but because of this quote unquote lost tribe, as Mulder theorizes later, like, they have to do this to survive because they have no pituitary gland.
Well, I looked that up too. Can you even live without a pituitary gland? And,
well,
I mean, not that I'm a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. WebMD is a dangerous endeavor. I tend to avoid it because, you'll go in there with a hangnail and discover some horrible disease that you have that you're going to die now. So WebMD is awful. But, I mean, according to, my 20 minutes of Google research, yeah, you can live without a pituitary gland, but you would need hormone replacement, and, it's not going to be an easy life, but you're not, I don't think you're going to be jamming blowguns in your esophagus. And
what was that about?
I have no idea. I just put yuck, blowgun swallowing.
They turn the tribal music up to 14 again. And you're like, what is he gonna like open up his mouth like a snake? Like, I didn't know what was gonna go on here.
He's unhinging his jaw. What's going on?
He pulls out this blow dart, and I'm like, I guess that's to hide it and get it through security, I guess. But again, you're giving this guy, you're giving him way too many powers. All right, like, okay, he's a pigmentation sucking vampire. Got it. Oh, he also is like, flexible or something, whatever power that would be.
Or
right?
Squishy. I don't know. We didn't see him stretch, so he's not the stretchy pituitary mutant.
And then on top of that, he's able to so that's like, what's that, 3 different abilities there.
Yeah.
But I guess the whole,
and he runs really fast apparently because he disappeared awfully quick.
That's true. I guess, I don't know, we'll call it, we'll say 2 abilities, Michelle, because I think the cramming the blow dart in your neck can kind of count with the Tomb's ability of being able to squeeze yourself. I don't contort your body. Contortion. All right, so that's what it is. Yeah. He's a contortionist, and he's a pigmentation-sucking vampire. Okay. Those two, I don't see a correlation between those two, and I find it odd that there would be one monster of the week that had both abilities. So that's a suspension of disbelief there. I'll give you one X-Files, but don't try to pull two on me. I'm going to have problems. So anyway, all that to say, Mulder and Scully, they go to Marcus for help. And he's concerned because they're FBI people, but they do win him over by saying it's a public health crisis. So he's like, okay, well then I'll look into it, and then I guess because of this, I was a little unclear about the A to B here, but I guess through talking to Marcus, Mulder and Scully got like the pictures of all the people that had recently come over from Africa through this guy, and so they're like staking out Aboa's house. And they see him like walking home from work or something, and then Mulder and Scully get out and they want to ask him some questions, and then he books it. It's like, okay, that's a way to avoid suspicion. If somebody says, "Hey, can I ask you a few questions?" Just run 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction, right?
Right. Because people that have nothing to hide frequently run away from somebody wanting to ask them a question.
And then when we get, honestly, and this is no exaggeration, one of the most confusing scenes of the entire series to me. I'm not exaggerating. So they were chasing Oboa. They go into this alleyway and he disappears, right? And they can't find him. They can't find him anywhere. They think he might have crawled over a fence or something. They're about to leave. Mulder looks into like this pipe on the side of a building, right? And he looks into it, and Oboa is in there, upside down, just hanging out.
So he's like a bat too. This is his vampire bat mode.
That's the connection. But he doesn't react to being found by Mulder and Scully at all. He's just hanging out in the pipe. I'm like...
And how did they get him out of there?
Yes! Because he's like, hey, Scully, come take a listen. She's like, oh my God.
Was Mulder already thinking he was a squishy contortionist? Is that why he looked in the pipe in the first place? I mean,
they have had some experience with these things.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, considering how gross that alley was anyway, I don't know that I want to be seeing whatever is hidden in there.
Right.
I mean, I suppose ultimately it's a good thing he did, because there was our pituitary pigment-sucking vampire bat hanging upside down. But it was weird.
But to me, I think the weirdest thing was like he doesn't react. He's like, oh, I guess you got me, right? I mean, he's just so chill in there. It's like so confusing to me. Like I remember when I first watched this, I was like, whoa, I had to like rewind it, to understand what had happened there. But so they, like as you said, they somehow get him out of there. I don't know how, but they take him to a medical center and give him an MRI and give him a full workup, but the doctors there think, they say he's asymptomatic, and they think it's a dead end. He doesn't follow the... Because Scully's thinking this guy's a carrier of some disease, right, or something. He doesn't, and they can find nothing weird about him. They want to stay... They keep him there because Scully wants to do some more tests and all that, and Marcus comes in, and he's all upset about Aboa being, taken into custody. And we get a mini scene of him talking about, well, Mulder's like, why do you run? He's like, well, if you had spent your whole life with police beating you down and burning down your home, you would run too, Agent Mulder. And it's like, okay, this is there again, social commentary where I don't think it quite applies here, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, that was one thing that actually did make sense to me. And it rang more true, I suppose, than anything else in this episode. That, yes, if you have lived your entire existence in fear of the police, because wherever you came from, they are corrupt or they are out to hurt you, then yeah, you are going to be mistrustful of authority figures, of police officers. So that was one piece of it that actually did, I think, ring a bit true. It may have been a bit heavy-handed. His speech may have been a bit melodramatic, but that was a piece that I actually felt was viable, was true, I suppose.
And you're right. It is the best attempt at that in this episode. I think
it was
low,
but
But it was for me, it was too little too late. And like, had they led with that kind of commentary, I would have been like, oh, all right, I see where they're going here. Cool.
Yes.
But we'd had half an episode of tribal music turned up to 14, and then all this other nonsense. It's like, okay, when you finally got to something that, as you said, had a lot of merit to it, out of context of this episode, when you get there, I'm kind of over it already, because we got a guy hiding in a drain pipe, pulling a toxic dart out of his neck. So, anyway, Mulder goes to find someone who deceive... and what's the middle word and obfuscate.
Yeah.
Right? He literally, again, this is repeated 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, Scully says it at least twice. They hit that one hard. Somebody learned new words that week, and they just
somebody
had to
bought a
cram
thesaurus. So Mulder goes to this embassy, and apparently, again, this is Marita helping him out, opening these doors to talk to this representative from West Africa, and. The guy, this is the guy who covered up the story of the man who died on the plane at the beginning, and he explains that well, again, Mulder has some great lines, right? The representative was like, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." And Mulder's like, "You'd be surprised, but I believe, sir."
Yeah, yes,
love it. But he tells him the myth of the Teliko, and that they're spirits of the air. And they rest in cold, dark places in the day and come out at night, and they squeeze into places too small for even children to hide. He tells them this whole legend. And he says that one night he was almost taken by one, but then he screamed and he woke up and his dad was there. And he thought it was just a nightmare, but then the next day his cousin died. And he looked exactly the same as the Teliko did. He said he had hair of straw and white skin, and it was a cool. I liked this guy's exposition here. I thought it was pretty cool, and then also the juxtaposition, the intercutting of Aboa escaping in the food cart. So I thought this was a very effective scene in this episode.
Yes, still very Toombs-esque, especially when he looks over and he sees the food cart. It was like, oh boy, okay, I have a feeling I know what's going to happen here, but. When they came to collect the food cart, nobody thought it was odd that the patient was no longer in their bed? Was he not hooked up to monitors? Hospitals are shady places in the X-Files.
Yeah, definitely.
Nobody seems to know how people get in there, how they leave, when they leave. Bad hospitals.
And you'd think they would notice the food cart was 160 pounds heavy.
Heavier.
This is really heavy.
I need some WD-40 for these wheels. It's not moving very well.
But yeah, so Mulder eventually finds out that this representative, he killed this story because when he saw this picture, of the man who had died in the airplane, that they looked just like the Teliko did. And so he's like, "Oh, we got a serious problem here. We need to cover this up." So that is why we are where we are with everything legally. But then Scully's looking at the X-rays of Aboa, and they first of all they see the spear in his throat, which is cool, and they determine that he has no pituitary gland. Mulder comes in and say, "Hey, he's gone," so that they start the search for him. But Aboa finds Marcus in the parking garage or something. And you're like, this is not going to be good. No,
nothing
for
good
Marcus.
comes to this. It's just don't let him in your Jeep. Call him a cab or something. This guy's weirding me out.
And it is, again, much like Toombs, I thought, because Toombs eventually turns on his psychiatrist or something. And again, we got a Boa here turning on his immigration officer. So he offers to drive him home. No, don't do it. Don't do it, Martian Manhunter. So... We do hear that Mulder and Scully are looking, and when we hear that the cops found Marcus's car, so we know he's been kidnapped. And then we get full. We'll talk about 14. We were 18 on the tribal music now.
Yeah,
with him, he's about to proceed and kill Marcus here. Huh?
Well, they find when they find him, Boa runs because I'm going to get caught. They find him. They're loading Marcus into the ambulance, and Scully says, "Do we know what happened to him? Did you look at him? He has a giant Q-tip stuck in his brain through his nose. I think we can figure out what happened to him."
Yeah, and again, as I alluded to earlier, extreme anticlimax for this character, right? I thought, because, okay, the climax of this episode coming up here is actually pretty well done, I think, but it's something we've seen 100 times before. We have a dark building, Mulder and Scully with flashlights that get separated. They're calling for each other. One of them gets in danger. It's the 4th season now, so we're progressive, and now Mulder's the one who gets
I was thankful for that.
right? So Scully has to save Mulder, and but again, I thought it would have been more effective if they were trying to save this officer, because maybe I'm biased because I like this actor. Like, I think the character, he was well-meaning. You want to see this guy win. You don't want to see him die. And so I thought you would have been more emotionally invested in the ending if they were trying to locate and save this guy instead of just each other. But they just kind of skip ahead from that. Like, okay, well, he's carted him off in the hospital. No exit, no final dialogue with this guy. He's just, the last we see him is, like you said, the spear up his nose.
He's got a Q-tip in his brain.
But we do find out in the captain's log at the end that he was okay. So at least they addressed that. But yeah, no. So then we have our climax here. It's pretty cliche. And again, we had that little hint earlier about asbestos, right? And that's how Mulder finds the building that Dubois is hiding in, which we find out is like his base of operations, because we eventually find all the dead bodies in there.
Right, because there's only one building. One old building in all of Philadelphia that is having asbestos abatement at this time, I'm sure.
Yes, that's exactly what I said. I'm glad they drove by the one building that's being demolished in Old Town, Pennsylvania. Oh my goodness gracious! So, but yeah, it is. But all those criticisms aside, I do feel the climax was well directed, and especially Scully's crawling to the air ducts and she finds a dead body here.
But that cliche too. I mean, she didn't learn from last time crawling through air vents. Nothing happens from this. I mean, there wasn't the giant propeller fan that's going to chop her to the machine. Yeah. And but we've seen this before. And these are some seriously reinforced ventilation ducts. I mean, I don't know if I'm not a huge person. I'm also not a tiny person. I don't think I would trust those little foil clips to hold my weight while crawling through an air duct. But that's the least offensive thing in this episode, so we'll just roll with it.
No, absolutely. And, he does, and this is something like, were they trying to say maybe he really was a spirit? I'm not sure, because he pops up at some point while she's in those air ducts, and she shoots at him. And we don't really see what happens, but he's gone, and there's 2 bullet holes in the air duct. And you're like, did he jump out of the way? Is he really a spirit of the air? Like, I don't know what they were trying to say there.
He's really squishy, and he went through the holes?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm not sure, but anyway, eventually she finds Mulder, she pulls him down out of the air ducts, which, gosh, Scully's stronger than we thought, huh?
No kidding. Yeah, lifeless, drugged, drooling Mulder. That was, poor guy.
So she calls it in, and while she's calling in, though, Mulder sees over her shoulder that Boa is back. And I thought this was pretty effective, because Mulder's paralyzed, and he can't communicate, but, he's like, oh my god, they're going to shoot Scully. Like, he's trying to, look with his eyes and stuff. I don't know. I thought it was pretty... I thought the tension was well done there. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, it was well shot. It felt very claustrophobic. It felt very intense. Yeah, I mean, because what else can you do, really? He's got to warn her, but you can't move. I mean, I can't imagine what the directions behind the scenes for shooting this scene were. Yeah, I mean, it was well shot. It was just, at this point, it's so ludicrous, and I don't know. I was so taken out of everything. I mean, there was just too much reality that needed to be suspended to buy into any of it, that by this point it was almost comical. So I found myself laughing at him, really. I'm still pondering how Scully, who is a foot shorter than Mulder and decidedly smaller, manages to get him out of that vent. Okay, so it's metal. Okay, it's like slide. Okay, we'll slide you out of there. But then how far off the ground was this vent? Either it was really obscurely low to the ground, like to the point of this is knee height. Otherwise, how did she pull him down out of there and he didn't squash her? This is all the not important stuff that's going through my brain during this scene, because I was just so far out of it by this point.
Well, let's put things in perspective. I'm right there with you with all the nitpicking and logistics, but this episode does feature a pigmentation sucking vampire who can squeeze into holes and fit a blow dart in his neck. So I'm just putting things in perspective.
But once again, it's just that, okay, there's so much, all right, I'll go with this. Okay, that's weird, but this is the X-Files, I'll go with it. It was just one stone too far. That final straw.
And this is something I've noticed, and some good episodes do it too. Don't get me wrong, right? But I found in some of the weaker episodes, they always kind of fall back on this, what I call it, the captain's log at the end, or from Star Trek terms, so case report 557. Mulder or Scully, they're sitting at a computer, they're typing it up, and she's kind of wrapping up the story, because they're like, we have like 2 minutes left, and we need to type all these loose ends. So she mentions that Marcus is going to be okay, which is great because I like this character. Too bad we didn't get a final scene with him. She does mention that Oboa's in custody, but he may not live to see his trial because he's dying due to his lack of a pituitary gland. But then she mentions the DIO words again.
Yep.
She's the fear of the alien among us. And then we only don't lie to them, but we lie to ourselves, or obfuscate, or something. Right? Very flowery, self-pretentious sounding dialogue. I thought, again, this is them trying a little too hard to make this seem a little too important. That was my take on it. What about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I agree. The level of patting themselves on the back, like, look at us, we're taking on this issue. And we're going to put it in flowery monologue to wrap up the episode. I mean, ultimately, the whole thing was just silly, and that can be fun, but there was too much in it to really be fun. I mean, certain things you can overlook, and it's just mindless entertainment, but this had to be a little bit too mindless, I think. The one thing I can say is I remember in previous watches it seeming even more offensive. Don't get me wrong, it's offensive, but I wasn't as... I guess I was surprised that it was... I remembered it being more offensive than it was, I guess. And it was plenty offensive. I'm not saying, wow, you guys really should have turned up the offensive level to 15. But as we said before, I don't think there was any intent to be offensive, but it could have definitely benefited from some rewrites. From Absolutely. More time to go over it and really think about how we want to phrase things and how we want to portray things. Especially, and maybe part of it too is looking at it through 2018 eyes with the immigration debate, we'll call it, that's happening in the U.S. specifically. And I mean, I'm sure worldwide, it's something other countries are looking at as well. But speaking of turning things up to 14, that is definitely a hot button topic in the States right now. So maybe looking at it through 2018 eyes, the immigration allegory and the alien among us, that's a sensitive subject now. So you look at it and it's even more kind of cringeworthy the way that was discussed.
Well, we are not alone in our opinion here. We had a couple of comments from the X Basement, from our X-Files Basement X-Cast podcast fan group, which you recommend you all go join on Facebook. We had a couple of comments on this episode. One from Maura Jaeger. She said, I have to rewatch this one to give it a fair review, but like Hell Money and El Mundo Gaira, which is the Chupacabra episode, the handling of race and other cultures on X-Files has always made me feel mildly uncomfortable. Those episodes definitely feel more dated. Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what we've been talking about. And then Michael Little also said, I like this one a lot more than El Mundo Gaira. It has some creepy moments. Having said that, the whole immigrant endangers America angle is quite distasteful. So, they're kind of that's the paradox of what the X-Files does with these. They're like, they try to like be progressive, but also like the outsider is the monster. I mean, literally in all these episodes. So it's like it's kind of conflicting messages that they're sending. So.
Yeah, I just think it could have been handled with a more deft hand, I think. They can open the door to conversations that should and need to take place. It just was so clumsily handled. I think that's what's can be considered distasteful. They tried. It was just very clumsy.
All right, Michelle, it's been a lot of fun talking about Teliko today. More fun than watching the episode has been talking about it with you, so thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
If people want to find you out there on the internet and talk more X-Files with you, where can they find you?
I am on Twitter. My handle is mmbaker13. I add the caveat all the time that I mostly lurk on Twitter, but I am getting better about posting things. So if you want to chat about X-Files, I can be found there.
All right, as for me, you can find me on Twitter at MooreonZach. That's MooreonZach. I'm also the host of my own podcast, Always Hold On to Smallville, where we talk about each and every episode of that Young Superman show. You can find us on Twitter at Always Smallville with one S. And I'm also a host of Standard Orbit, a Star Trek original series podcast. You can find us on the Trek FM network on Twitter at Trek FM. And as for the X-Cast, you can find us on Facebook at the X-Files Basement, the X-Cast podcast fan group. So we love interacting with all kinds of fun stuff, always popping up on the Twitter and on the Facebook page for the X-Cast. So be sure to find us there. But until next time, keep listening, keep watching the skies, and trust no one.
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and presented by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated group of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find us on Twitter at The Xcast, and on Facebook if you type in The Xcast, or at our group X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, where you can continue the discussion about all things Mulder and Scully. If you want to support The Xcast further, you can now subscribe and become a patron of the show on Patreon. On Google, just type patreon.com/The Xcast. That's Patreon. You'll see all of our tiers, subscription options and perks, which include early access to episodes, bonus content such as commentaries on X-Files episodes, access to a patron chat zone, and even appearing on one of our patron roundtable discussions. We would appreciate any support you can give the show, so just go to patreon.com/The Xcast to find out more. Our title music is provided courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.